Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extension tutorial series, and in this tutorial we are building our first ListView Command Set extension. The ListView Command Set extensions are basically there for you to enable custom buttons or in context menu items within the lists and libraries within your SharePoint sites. And this is the September 2018 edition, meaning that this has been recorded in September 2018 with the guidance which was available in September 2018. We keep on evolving these tutorials and videos as we release newer versions of SharePoint Framework. Now let's actually jump right into the tutorial and start by creating the folder where we're going to actually create a solution. So let me actually create a folder for it. So MD command extension, and let's actually go to that newly created folder. In here we're going to run a Yo Microsoft SharePoint, and that's going to then start the SharePoint Framework Yeoman generator. And following up on the guidance and the written guidance, we're going to use the default solution name. We kind of use the current, use the SharePoint Online as the version, because in 2016 the SharePoint Framework extensions are not supported. And we kind of use the current folder, so that's fine. And then there's the interesting question around tenant scope deployment. So in this tutorial, this is designed to be a solution which is installed explicitly to a site. So whenever the solution is getting activated, in that site, list and libraries, well, in this case, actually custom lists will have a custom functionality or custom buttons inside of it. Now, using the tenant scope deployment option, so answering yes in here, and then taking advantage of the tenant-wide deployment option for extensions, you are able to push extensions, or like ListView command sets, available to the whole tenant. So you can, for example, add a custom button to every single document library within your tenant. So every single site within your tenant would have those and the custom library, custom buttons or menu items available. But anyway, in this particular case, we kind of say no. So we are expecting this solution to be explicitly installed to the site where we're going to use that. And then we're going to start and choose an extension. This was the ListView Command Set tutorial, so let's select that one. And using the default hello world value is fine for that, and the hello world description is fine for description as well. And now the Yeoman generator starts the default scaffolding of the solution before we start actually implementing then the actual customizations. Since the scaffolding takes a while, let's actually speed up the video until the scaffolding is fully completed. And there we go, now the scaffolding is completed, so we have a solution which we can then open in the Visual Studio Code. So let's actually do that by running a command. So let me actually clear the view. There we go, and we will run the code and dot, and that's going to actually start the Visual Studio Code solution and open it up in the Visual Studio Code. Now, the obvious things what you can notice from here is it's a basic structure is exactly the same as for the web parts or the field customizers or any extension as well, because the basic solution structure in SharePoint Framework is identical. So we have the config folder, we have the package solution, we have the basic structure and all of the other elements available in here. Now, since we chose to create a ListView command set, we actually created some example content here which we can start with. So we can actually start by extending these or modifying these settings to get our specific customization available. So first of all, the manifest file. So the manifest file is there to identify and give a unique ID for the ListView command set. And in this manifest file, we can also say that we have two items available. So this defines the actual commands to be rendered in the toolbar or in the context menu. How they are being rendered and where they're being rendered, we'll come back on that one. It depends on the registration of the actual ListView command set. So from here we can see that by default we have two different commands, so command 1 and command 2, and they have a default names of command 1 and command 2. Now the same names and same values are also available within the code. So first of all, if we quickly have a look on the code, we are using SP ListView extensibility packages, and those are providing us the base ListView command set, the command object as well. And then in the code, we actually are switching the implementation based on was the command 1 or command 2 clicked. So relatively simple functionality, and in this case we also explicitly enable the one command only when we have at least one item selected, or exactly one item selected from the selected rows collection. So one item in a list is selected, then the command 1 is actually visible. That's what this code is actually doing here. We get an instant on command 1, and then we set the visibility to be visible based on the selection of items in the list. Good, so that's the basic structure which has been now created for us. And first things first, before we start modifying the structure, let's actually test that the debugging of the structure is working properly. So we can use an existing site, so you can use any site within your tenant, and we can use, in our case, we're going to use the orders list, which we actually created in a different exercise earlier on the tutorial series. So you can easily create whatever list in your tenant or in your site which you're using, and then add few items on the list, so you're able to then test the functionality. So I'm going to copy the URL on the list which we're going to use for live debugging of the functionality. Then I'm going to move back on the code. Then I'm going to go to the config folder. I'm going to click the serve.json, and this is the debugging functionality. So what we're doing here is that we are telling for SharePoint Framework Yeoman templates and Gallop to actually open up this URL in a debugging way. So we're going to actually extend the URL with the debugging query parameters with the specific settings, which we can see here, and that's going to then enable the functionality. It's going to load the functionality and solution from a local host, and you can actually see the functionality then available within the list as well. So let's actually make that happen. So I'm going to save the setting. So we change the default configuration to match that URL, which we agreed we're going to use, and the URL is the orders list in this browser window. So let me go back on the command line, and we're going to do gulp serve. And that's going to then start the needed gulp tasks, and it's going to also load the URL which we defined in the serve.json file with the needed query parameters after that. So that's going to then define and tell for SharePoint that please load the needed customizations from a local host. And as you can see, we have a command 2 button available by default already in the ribbon. Sorry, not in the ribbon, in the toolbar. So, and then we can click that, and there's a dialog being shown. Or if we select the one item from the list menu, we can actually see the command 1 and command 2, like we were defined in the code of the actual JavaScript. So, and we can click the command 1, and that's going to say one item is selected from the list. Cool. So now the basic debugging is working, and now we're able to then make sure that if we start modifying the functionalities, we can then test that it's working properly within this list, which gives you then the opportunity of doing real debugging and testing against the live SharePoint site, and that is actually pretty cool. Now, the way we define where these items are being visible, so are they visible within the context menu, or are they visible in the toolbar, is by defining the location attribute in the serve.json file. So in here, right now we're saying that these two buttons should be available only in a command bar. There's a few different options on this, so you could actually have a .context menu, and that would then mean that you actually want these buttons to be available in the context menu for the items, or you might actually leave that away completely, and that then means that the buttons or the selection or the ListView Command Set should be visible in both toolbar and in the context menu. But let's actually leave the original value there. So we want to actually test this functionality in the command bar. But based on the location entry, you can define how the button is actually visible. Now, we want to slightly modify the rendering of this functionality. So let's go back on the code. Let's open up the code of our implementation. And as you can see, we're using just the dialog functionality to show the value of certain things. Now, let's modify the onExecute implementation slightly. So I'm going to copy the tutorial exercise, and let's see what we actually did here. So the command 1 is still saying that you clicked command 1, but the command 2 has been slightly modified. So there's a dialog.prompt being used, which you can use for requesting an entry or some sort of a value using a text string. And then we're actually getting that value and showing that in the dialog alert value as well. So we're kind of using, just demonstrating the usage of the dialog component to get a value, and then we're showing that value within the code. Relatively simple functionality in this case, but the whole point is to really get used to how do we package this stuff, how do we debug stuff, and how do we modify the code as well. Good, code has been modified. The easiest way, there's two ways of now actually reloading the JavaScript, so I could actually restart the process, or I could also go now on the list and I can reload the page, and that's going to again refresh the JavaScript from a local host. I'm going to accept the load to debug scripts, and now I can see that there's a command 2 loaded, and if I click that one I can see the command 1 loaded as well. So clicked command 1, or if I click the command 2, it's going to ask me and some additional message, so there's a prompt being asked, and I can actually then write something on this prompt, so like value for the prompt request, and there we go. So let's click OK, and then it's going to actually show the value in a separate dialog. So it's just to demonstrate the dialog functionality. Now, how do we then get all of this packaged and deployed to the site as a reusable SPPKG file or a reusable component? Well, let's go and have a look on that one in the solution file as well. So let's go and extend the SharePoint folder. And in the SharePoint folder, by default, when the ListView Command Set selection was selected, we actually created a default configuration for registering a client-side extension ListView Command Set to the command bar section for a list template ID 100. And list template ID 100 means a custom list. If you would like to register the command or the button, for example, for document library, you would do that for defining list template ID 101. So these are the classic list template IDs of SharePoint, which been existed already since 2007, and it's all obviously documented in our documentation. The next thing what we actually have here is also the properties. So these are the properties for the entry, and now when I'm looking this, we are actually looking on a wrong file. So the client-side instance XML, just to clarify this throughout, client-side instance XML is for defining the tenant-wide deployment entry. So it actually has the similar values as the registration entry, which is the element XML file in the assets folder. So the values are pretty similar. So registration ID is for 101 or 100, and you would be able to actually register the same entry for both custom list and for the document library if you were doing something like following. So you would do one registration for 100 and one registration for 101. And that would then mean that the button, which we are now deploying, would be registered to every single new list and an existing list, and also a new library and an existing library in the site where this is getting activated. And we also define the location value, so how is the buttons being activated, and we also define what is the client-side component ID. So this is by default matching the client-side component ID, which we now generated when we executed the ListView command set. But if you would have multiple extensions in a single solution, which is relatively typical setup, you would have to go and copy basically this registration section, update the client-side component ID so we get that one correct, and potentially also update the properties entry for the client-side component, depending on what kind of properties you will have within your extension. Now let's get rid of the secondary entry here. We don't actually need that based on the tutorial, so we're not going to actually modify that too much. Just quickly coming back on the client-side instance XML, like mentioned, this is related on the ListView command set. So this one, what this one actually means is that we want to have and we want to have this extension enabled on the whole tenant from a single location. So if you're using the tenant scope deployment option and you're using the tenant-wide deployment of extension, you're able to use this file to actually add an entry to a specific list in an site collection, which will then automate that extension to be available across the tenant. Now, in our case, in this exercise, we actually answered no to that question in the default scaffolding, which means that we're not going to actually follow up on that guidance. Now, the second thing what we need to notice, so the element XML file is here, that's going to be then activated whenever the solution is getting installed on the site. The second item, which is important from a packaging perspective, is the package solution JSON. And this one actually has the entry of the element XML file included inside of it. And just for the clarity perspective and avoiding any confusions, we can actually get rid of the client-side instance XML from the registration file. So we want to ignore that file because we're not going to do a tenant scope deployment for this ListView command set. We only want to get the element XML file in. So I'm actually updating that section and getting rid of the ListView command set from the packaging side. Good. Now that we're good to go, so basically the key points also notice here is that the include client-side assets is true, and that means that the JavaScript files which we generate from this Visual Studio Code are automatically inside of the SPPKG file. Is inside of this SPPKG file, so whenever we deploy that, everything is ready to go, and depending on the CDN settings, it's either served through the CDN or it's served through the application app catalog site collection URLs. Now, let's move back on the command line. Let's do the packaging of the items. So I'm going to break the ongoing localhost which is running. So let's clear that one. Let's run a gulp bundle and that's the ship, and that's going to then repackage the JavaScript file or transcompile the JavaScript TypeScript files to the JavaScript so that the browsers can actually run just JavaScript on their side. There's certain warnings in this case on there related on the references on the images, but for now we're going to ignore them. And then we're going to do gulp package solution. That's the ship. And that's now then creating the solution file in the SharePoint folder. So you can actually see that arriving here in, there we go. We are now getting the solution file underneath the SharePoint folder, and the solution is called command extension SPPKG file. So if I extend the solution, I can actually see that file available in the folder. Now, in this case, what we want to do is that I actually want to open this one in the Explorer. So let me actually select reveal in Explorer, and I can actually see the SPPKG file now available. So I'm able to install that to my tenant, to my test tenant. So let me actually activate that view. And let's go to the app catalog site collection. And in this tenant, let's see, do we actually have any existing solutions here? No, it's completely clean. So for now, we're going to drag and drop the command extension to be available for the people to install in the site level. So that is now getting updated if the drag and drop actually works. So let's do that one more time. And here we go. And what's interesting here is that since we use the --ship option for packaging everything inside of the SPPKG file, we can actually see in here that the assets are getting served from the following domains, and the domains being SharePoint Online. And what this means is that we will automatically serve the assets either from the CDN or from the application catalog site collection. So we're basically ready to go. We don't have to copy any assets on any CDN. Everything is fully automatic on the SharePoint side. So let's click deploy, and that is now getting deployed. We didn't have any exceptions. The deployed status is true. It's not a tenant deployed. No errors when we actually did that. Now we want to test this on an actual site. So let's actually go to a existing site. So we can use the group site where we tested this already, and let's actually create a new list to this site as well. So let me go to site contents, And now it's actually still loading the debug files even and debug URLs or trying to load the local host, but the local host is not actually running. So this is something which might happen to the caching of the debugging cookie. So let's actually fix this one. So for now, I'm going to say don't load debug scripts. And then I'm going to add here a reset equals 1. And that's going to actually reset the debugging cookie, and that means if I click now site contents, we do not get the same exception or a warning around loading files from a local host. So we wanted to create a list called sample. So let's call this a sample list. It is a custom list, it's not a document library. In our code, we want actually the solution to activate within this list. Now, we didn't, however, yet go to the site and install that solution from the app catalog. So let's actually do that as well. So let's go to the app and install an app. Let's choose our command extension, client-side solution. And that is now getting installed on the site. So that is getting installed, and this might take a while, again slightly depending on the status of the servers and status of the farm. So this is an asynchronous operation when you're adding the solution or adding an application or an add-in to a SharePoint site, and clicking the refresh, we can actually see when the command extension is fully deployed on the site. This might take a while, like mentioned, so we're going to speed up a video until the solution has been installed to the site. And there we go. Now the command extension client-side solution has been installed. We already created the sample list. Actually, in the written tutorial, you first install the application and then you create the list, but it doesn't actually technically matter. So, you know, when we go to the sample list, we can actually see that we have the command to button already immediately available. Now, if we want to test this with an actual functionality, we could add some items in here. Absolutely. So I can add an item A here. And then we can actually make sure that our selection is working as well. So selecting a one item, it is actually then showing the command 1 on the button on the toolbar list. And if I click the command 2, it's going to actually prompt me the message, and we can actually test the functionality that it's working properly, and we are getting the prompting from the code. And key point here to notice once again is that the source code or the code itself is not, there is no local host running. The code is actually getting served automatically either from CDN or from the app catalog site collection. So you don't have to worry about where the code is actually hosted. We use the --ship option when we package the code and we get it prepared. And now this package, which is an SPPKG package in the app catalog site, can be basically sent to any tenant and anybody can take that into a use. And that's really cool capability. But that's all what we're going to do in this tutorial. So hopefully you enjoyed that and follow up on the other videos as well. Thank you.